Thank you. Hi. And I'm standing between you and lunch. Such a great slot, isn't it? Right. So I am going to talk today actually not terribly much about analytics, which is weird for an analytics conference. But I am going to talk about something that I'm actually pretty passionate about, and it's supporting our diversity and inclusion strategies, and in particular our gender balance acceleration plan at Nestle. Thankfully, because my job is in analytics, that means that I do all of that support in a quite analytical way. So we will talk a bit about analytics, but how we're driving our diversity agenda using some cool stuff. So a little bit about Nestle, because I need to set context. You all know that we sell Kit Kats though, right? Yeah, okay. So Kit Kats, we also sell things like Nespresso, Nescafe, sunscreen, Botox, little known fact, we sell Botox. So Nestle's, we're big. I think the official strapline is that we're in over 150 countries. The only one that we're not present in is North Korea. So the number is actually about 190, 191, depending on how the UN's counting at that point in time. And we are spread across loads of different products. I've been at Nestle around 3 years now. When I joined, I would have sworn black and blue that a bunch of the brands that I grew up with as a kid in Australia, knowing that that was a true blue Australian brand, is in fact Swiss. So we're everywhere. And we're across a really different group of products. So we like to think of ourselves as a health, well-being, and health, well-being and nutrition company. So quite aside from selling Kit Kats, which are great and we should all keep eating them, there's a lot of our portfolio that's about pharmaceutical, we're in skin health, we do a lot of coffee. Did everyone go and see Vanessa speak yesterday? She was the best speaker yesterday, right? So we have waters as well. And what that creates is a really heterogeneous workforce. So they're really different in all of our different countries. The one thing that is pretty consistent though is that we're more than 50% traditional blue collar. And there's lots of factories, there's lots of distribution centers, and that means that we are pretty male heavy. And it's just the nature of working in that kind of industry. So that in mind, and I think my next one just says that we're trying to enhance the quality of life by not just selling Kit Kats. That in mind, Nestle made a pretty bold move late last year, which was going to the United Nations and making a pledge at the International Labour Organization to say that we are very deliberately and specifically trying to address the gender imbalance inside of Nestle. We've made a couple of big commitments around moving far more women into senior leadership roles, achieving more of a balance across our workforce. And one of the big things that we were talking about at the ILO is specifically around the way that we remunerate our workforce and reward our workforce. And I guess it's a bit of a hot topic. It doesn't matter which country in the world you're in. In the press, we're talking about gender pay gap or gender pay equity. And so one of the things that we committed to was that we were going to understand and address any pay gaps and inequities that we find across the business. So, bearing in mind that Nestle is in all of those countries and we have all of those employees, and that means that we pay people out of all of those different payrolls with loads of different salary grades and pay scales and currencies, that was a fairly bold, scary statement for me, at least, for our CEO to be making externally, because that means that we needed to be able to facilitate Nestle understanding how we pay people in all of those different places, in all of those different currencies, out of all of those different payrolls, et cetera, in a way that our CEO can then go and talk about it externally. So fun. So I can happily say that we've achieved supporting the business to do this, and that's what I want to talk to you about today. So The theory is, in understanding and addressing pay equity gaps, we want to pay people who do the same work in the same way. It's pretty standard. In looking at that, that means that we are talking about two different things. And depending on where it is that you work, the government is going to require you to report on one of two different things. One of them is the gender pay gap, and one of them is equal pay. On that side, my right, that side. That's basically add up all of the salaries of men and divide it by the number of men you've got, add up all the salaries of women and divide it by the number of women you've got, and it's then comparing the average male salary to the average female salary. Bearing in mind what I've said earlier, that we have loads of men, that side isn't the prettiest number for Nestle to be looking at. By virtue of the fact that our male sample size is larger than our female sample size, our CEO is a man. You know, it's, the numbers mean that we do have a gender pay gap. You know, that's life. On this side, it's more about understanding if you hold everything else about two people the same, but they vary by gender, are those two people paid in the same way? Depending on where you are, the government wants you to report on one or both of these numbers. So we've devised a way to do both of those things. We measure on the right, as we said, you know, add up all of the female salaries, divide it by the number of women you've got. It's not particularly difficult maths. On this side of the screen, what we needed to do was build a stepwise regression model that helps us to add all of the different factors that we know about people into a model to understand what is actually influencing the way that they're paid, and then control for gender. There's not many of my team. There are about 6,000 HR people in Nestle globally. We're like 350,000 people as a company, so 6,000 is not a crazy number for us to be in HR. But there are 35 in my function. So there's no way, it would take all of our time across the next however long for us to go and deliver this as projects in each of our countries. So the first thing that we needed to do is help our HR people understand that there are these two things, and that they're different and that they're measured differently. So we actually created a little video.
Diversity and inclusion is an integral part of Nestle's culture. Our values are rooted in respect, including respect for diversity. Here we strive to create equal opportunities for all genders. Improving our gender balance will help us reduce our gender pay gap. Equal pay and gender pay are not the same thing. Do you know the difference? Equal pay compares the pay between anyone, men and women, performing the same or an equivalent job. Two people might do the same job, but they don't always have the same salary. Gender pay compares the average pay between all men and all women, regardless of their job. If either gender is paid more on average, then a gender pay gap exists. The average pay of men is higher than the average pay of women if there are more men in senior roles. A lack of women in senior leadership roles makes a gender gap much more likely. How can we tackle this? Women must have the same career opportunities as men and be equally represented at all levels of the organisation.
So we launched a bit of a communications program around our gender balance acceleration plan. That video sort of went out to introduce the idea that these things are different. Pay equity and pay gap aren't something that we want to address by themselves. They're part of a much broader program. It might be about promoting women, giving them different career opportunities and such forth. But one of the big things that we've made the external commitment about is measuring and doing something about any gaps that we find in pay. So what we then did was throw together a project team that was then going to drive capability and understanding of these concepts into all of our markets and support them to be able to do all of that analysis and action taking locally. So you can see they're a bit of bit of I guess it's an org charty kind of concept. We very deliberately didn't want to address this as an analytics project because analytics projects are about data and they're hard and there's maths and our HR business partners don't think that that's a lot of fun. So what we wanted to make sure we were doing was getting out and helping people to understand what those concepts are so that they can then take more of an action-oriented approach to understanding how we pay men and women differently. So very much a three-part project. There was myself, our head of reward, our head of diversity and inclusion, and it all kind of went out under the umbrella of our gender balance acceleration plan. Within our then project team, we basically had it supported by our centers of competence. So in our HR structure, we have three functions. There's myself, we've got talent, and we have reward. We have corporate teams based in Switzerland, and then we have COCs that represent us in each of our regions. And then each of those regional COCs support a number of markets. So effectively, our project team was us at the center, people from our core teams in reward and in people analytics at the center, and then the deployment was led out of our COCs, working directly with reward and data people in each of our markets. So what we sought to do was roll out what we're calling the gender pay equity tool, because it does what it says on the tin and measures pay equity in a tool, to each of these reward managers in each of the markets. Reward managers, because they have access to all of our HR data anyway, they need to do things like calculate our bonuses based on our performance ratings and all of that sort of jazz. So they have access to the data and there's no sensitivity. They also have access to all of the payroll data because they're reward and they earn payroll. So working with the reward managers and then our data specialists is what we would label them, but those people who can pull all of the data out and go and correct data in the platforms if there's gaps in what we're trying to get out. Basically educated people on how to get to the data that they want to be using to measure pay gap and pay equity, how to structure that data in a way that the tool will accept it in, and then how to step through building the stepwise regression model that would come to the numbers that they could then go and take some action with. We very specifically limited scope to make it something that these reward managers who may have met statistics previously or may not have, tried to limit scope so that they were able to tackle this in a project in kind of the last 3 months of last year, and then focus on rolling out across our total population across the next sort of 18 months, 2 years. That scope was limited to our headquarters locations in each of our markets and predominantly our white-collar population. Very deliberately picked that scope, again, because we're so heavily traditionally blue-collar, means that within our blue-collar population, we really don't have a lot of scope to pay people differently. If we think about two people standing on a Kit Kat production line, those two people doing the same job under things like unions or collective agreements, they're likely to be paid the same. We don't have a lot of leeway as people managers to pay them differently. In our white-collar population, obviously, there's a bit more discretion in the way that line managers are able to pay people. So that population then enabled us to find the most interesting stuff in those markets. Right, so that was our project organization. What we then did was support those reward managers and their data people in their markets to analyze locally. And again, that's really important because action is going to be taken locally. It's not going to be someone in the corporate center that looks at country X, says there is gap there and go in and mediate on the country's behalf. It's all very, very locally driven. So that's kind of the business that we are. We're a company of 57 geographical markets. So analyzed locally and then aggregate those data elements so that at a global level, our leadership can then be going out and saying, this was the initial scope, these were our results, this is what they're now doing about it, this is the next set. So local analysis, then global output. The theory was we made these statements externally in September of last year, and the first findings of this project were to be used in our annual salary review at the beginning of this year. So achieved that, which was fun. I say fun, I don't know that our teams thought that it was as much fun as they were burning the midnight oil, but really cool, because it does mean that the outcome of these pieces of analysis, that for some of our awards managers was the first time they were doing that kind of statistics since they left university, however many years ago that was. The tangible result was then used in the annual salary review cycles, which is cool, right? Directly impacting the way that we review people's salaries to make sure that we're paying men and women in a more equitable format. So what do we look at? As I say, on that side of the screen, we added up all of the female salaries and divided by the number of women we had, and that gave us the average female salary, and did the same for men and compared the two. On this side of the screen, what our tool did was pull together a load of data that we have held about all of our employees. I'm very, very lucky in my role at Nestle in that about 15 years ago, Nestle was one of the very few companies who'd actually implemented a global HR platform that has all of our employees in the same place. So there's a bunch of data that is horrible to work with and really, really very local and impossible to aggregate, but a lot of data that we are able to collect across all of our employee population. So we're able to say, take all of these data factors, pull them into the upload sheet that needs to go into the tool, make sure that the data is complete. If it's not complete, please don't go and correct it in the upload sheet, go and correct it in SAP so that we can then extract it permanently and address some of our data quality programs as a byproduct of this project. And then run your model and come to what your pay equity results are, and then importantly, use them, because a pay equity report that sits on someone's shelf doesn't do anything to improve the lives of women at Nestle. So this is what we did. A few snapshots of the tool. The tool, one of the data scientists on my team built, so it wasn't within our IT community. She used R, which is the Microsoft statistical package. She pulled the modeling in R into a Shiny front end, again, a Microsoft tool that basically enables an idiot like me, also who hasn't done statistics really in some time, to step through, take Excel, upload sheet, populate from SAP, load, and then it's really a paint by numbers kind of tool that helps you to understand what the next factor is going to be that's most predictive, yada, yada. And then it spits out a whole bunch of very visual analysis that helps people that aren't really statistics driven to understand what's going on in their data. So you can see there's a bit of a histogram going on there that looks at the way that data is distributed. So this is looking at within a totally simulated data. I should stress that actually. I'm not showing you any of our real data because I would be shot. But simulated data, the way that your data is distributed, so we'd have a look at things like our age distributions and our tenure distributions and the sorts of jobs that people do, the lines of business that they work in or their functions, and then looking at the range of salaries across each of our different, in this case, it's the functions. So a bit of a descriptive analysis of the way that data looks. It then told you a little bit about the model itself, and effectively the education we gave to people was we wanted the output to look like this, because then that means that the relationship is stronger. If it looks like that, then the relationship is not particularly strong, and if the relationship is strong, then we'll feel more confident about the decisions that we're making at annual salary review time than if the relationship isn't. Make sense? And then finally, it spits out your pay equity results. So in this case, we're looking at a set of data that tells us that women earn approximately, or specifically, 1.013 times what men do. Cool, no? What we also added towards the end of the project was a helping you get to the so what, and helping you decide what the hell am I going to do now that I know that women earn 1.013 times what men do. It's an interesting number, but how do I go and address it? What we wanted to help people understand was where there was pay inequity, if there was pay inequity, how was it happening? Because depending on how that inequity is resulting, it's going to vary what we decide to do in a strategic way. So we added these plots that showed us where if the stereotypically pink for girls line is consistently to the left of the stereotypically blue for boys line, that means that women are systemically paid less than men across all of our grades, across all of our jobs, across the entire population. That's going to drive very different actions than if this chart pops out, where you have peaks, where a specific group of women are paid differently to men. And so that then was how the reward managers started to work with their HR directors in the markets and their management committees to be saying, hey, we've done this analysis, looks like we have or we don't have pay gaps or pay equity problems. We can see that the pay equity problem, if we have it, is systemic or in pockets. And therefore, some of the recommendations that we can make is that in annual salary review, we give all of our women a 1,000% salary increase. Or in this pocket, there are some activities that we need to go and take to make sure that those pay pieces are equalized. Or, holy whack, it's so totally systemic, and under the umbrella of our gender balance acceleration plan, we really need to be thinking about the way that we promote women, the way that we educate women, the way that we create opportunities for women to have the same opportunities as men in order to equalize those lines out. And there you go. The other thing that we launched, so that was kind of done by the end of last year. As I say, that was then the output of that was used in the annual salary review at the beginning of this year. Very much started to get our leadership teams thinking about the actions that they need to take to accelerate on our gender balance acceleration plan. What we also then committed to doing was making it very, very easy for our management committees in markets to quantify how they were progressing against all of the different points in our gender balance acceleration plan. So we built a global dashboard. We removed all of the employee level data from it. So at no point can you go and see that we're talking about John or Sue, but at any point, any person in HR is able to access what is a pretty ugly dashboard. It's fair, it's just a bunch of boxes and numbers. But it has all of the key values that our leadership team in HR and our executive board is regularly tracking and reporting on, because these are the numbers that Mark Schneider made commitments about when he was speaking at the ILO. So these dashboards, again, very clearly dummy data, because again, I would be shot in the face if I gave you real data. It gives real-time, anytime access to our global population, which we think is pretty cool. As I guess being in an organization with quite so many HR people that we have without a hugely high level of data literacy, being able to make the reporting on this easy removes the excuse and removes our ability to kind of hide it. And so I think that's all that I wanted to share with you. And I guess that means that I'll throw to questions, as long as they're not particularly technical or difficult.
Easy questions for Jordan.
Exactly.
Go right there, please.
Hi. Great talk, by the way. When you took all your global markets, did you then put it up to a kind of a group level? And if you did, how did you compensate them?
Jordan, you mind repeating the question?
Yeah. So the question was, when we aggregated all of the analyses to a global level, how did we do that? Did we do that? We kinda did it, in that because it's all different currencies, there's different costs of living and all of that sort of stuff, it's really, really hard, and we decided not to do that. What we decided to do was to compare the pay equity number in a column chart that kind of showed the gap and where the gaps were big or small, if they existed or not. And so it was kind of an eyeball analysis that looked at all of the markets and showed where the pay inequities were. Happily, actually, we're okay. As I said, like we have loads more men and we have quite a few senior men, and that's why we've made external commitments to accelerating our gender balance plan. But in terms of pay equity, we kind of sadly didn't find anything particularly interesting. But that's a good thing. But yeah, we weren't comparing like at the data level. It was literally looking at across all of our markets where the gaps were. And that kind of gave our leadership teams an opportunity to be saying, we need, as a leadership team, to be specifically talking to that market because there is something that we want to go and talk to that market head and that market HR director around what their plans are to accelerate faster. But from a data level aggregation, we did not.
And just one other thing, congratulations about using a box of whisker because half of VPs are.
Thank you very much. I did have feedback from one of our HR directors that she wasn't sure that her reward manager understood the output of the analysis better than she did, which was, a little alarming given that the reward manager had run the project for that market. But I guess the next steps for this project for us as well is that because we narrowed scope specifically to do headquarters, that means that we've not done this analysis in all of our countries, and we've not done this analysis across all of our headcount, and we committed to do both of those things. So at the end of this project, one of the big things that came out of it was that we needed to do ever so slightly more education for a number of the people that were in the project, just to help them to understand how to describe the outputs more confidently, how to describe the outputs in a way that were going to influence decision-making. But it was a great learning journey for all of us, I think. And now all of those markets are now prioritizing the countries that they're going to go through their total population. There you go.
Show of hands, who has a similar initiative going on in your organization?
Everybody, right? Yeah.
Most everyone. So my question to you, you mentioned the CEO and the organization at large made a commitment, and you're partnering with the head of Total Rewards, and how did that happen? Because I'm really interested in how, it's multidisciplinary when you're solving a complex problem like that. So how did that team form, and are you expanding the reach of this team into, because it reminded me, talent acquisition, was it talent, Total Rewards, talent acquisition?
Us, so the analytics team and our diversity and inclusion team.
And is talent acquisition in that as well, or no? Because hiring would matter as well, and what offers
so I
are
mean,
made.
under the gender balance acceleration plan, there's a load of things that we're trying to address. So you can see in our our dashboard where there's a real focus on things like women successes and the number of women who are successful as successors. We have a big focus with our talent acquisition team at the moment on really understanding the strength of our succession pools. There was a focus a while ago where our measures that were important were these ones. So the percent of our succession roles that had a female successor on it, and that obviously drove some behavior. What gets measured gets managed, as they say. So there are, in fact, we hit all the KPIs for having female successors on those succession plans. What we're now uncovering with the recruiting team is that actually we hit those targets because there's a female successor, but she might be on 30 succession plans. That's a gross exaggeration. But she might be on many succession plans with a bunch of men. And given that she's on all of those succession plans and there are multiple men on the succession plan, if we remove her, then we don't hit those targets anymore. And so, as I say, it drove a behavior, and now we're really seeking to understand how strong those succession plans genuinely are. So if we have a key role in a market, how likely is it that the female successor on that succession plan is going to be the successor for that role? Because she's genuinely ready now, and she's geographically located in the place that position is going to be made available when the incumbent moves on. So there's a load of stuff that we're doing with the recruiting team to understand how we can better understand our internal pipeline. And then obviously there's loads of stuff that the recruiting team are doing in terms of responsible hiring.
That's fantastic. It sounds like you're in a similar situation and you've earned this situation, similar to what Brad Hubbard was saying, where you are a collaborative partner from the outset. You're not like, okay, we're doing this and how do we measure it? You're actually actively involved in guiding what can and should be done to achieve those outcomes.
Exactly.
Is that fair to say?
Exactly. And you might have picked up, I'm a little bit bossy. So injecting myself into those discussions when we're talking about how we want to measure, like I think there's some things like we definitely don't talk about having targets, because setting quotas for women or men or anything is actually super illegal in a bunch of places. So being involved in all of those discussions up front, talking about how we might measure it, how we would understand what actions we're driving to have an impact on that number at the end, is something that I am directly involved in. And it's, our leadership team's like pretty collaborative, which is good. And I think because gender balance became this big thing when our CEO talked about it externally, it's meant that we have this overarching gender balance acceleration plan that each of the leaders in the HRLT are responsible for a bit of, but collectively they're responsible for the whole lot. So our success in delivering the gender balance acceleration plan is not based on the success of our recruiters, and it's not based on the success of our reward team. And in measuring pay equity and doing stuff about pay equity, you know, it needed to be owned by a bunch of people, because ultimately the actions coming out of it are going to be owned by a bunch of people, which is it's a nice culture to work in. Nestle's pretty cool.
It sounds just very real and authentic. Couple questions for Jordan, because I have at least two more. So my question is this, and by the way, I wouldn't, if you want to define it bossy, I say clear and assertive.
Sure. We can dress it up. Yeah,
we can dress it. So I want to come back because I asked two questions and you took the second one. So the mandate's put out, okay, and you're forming the team. Okay, how does that glue come together? Like, okay, we now have to do this. Because I'm really curious around this notion of governance, for lack of a better term, and how teams are formed, who leads it, who actually puts it. Was it the CHRO saying, okay, you three go figure it out? Or was it, hey, gosh, I got an idea, let's come together? And was it formal, was it informal? If you can talk to that experience.
So Nestle is Swiss, and so we love bureaucracy. We govern everything to within an inch of its life. So there's a lot of, and I bitch about it, but it is actually pretty good, because it does give us that structure that we kind of have a pretty set way of constructing teams. There's a pretty set way of identifying who's ultimately responsible, who's going to be working on it, and that sort of stuff. In terms of forming this team, it was kind of, Mark went and made these statements at ILO and came and told Sonia, who is our head of D&I, that as the head of D&I, go and make it happen. And so at our next leadership team meeting, Sonia was like, hi, help. And it was, I think, because she's responsible for the Gender Balance Acceleration Plan, she'd written it all, she worked pretty collaboratively with each of us anyway, because in the D&I role, it's largely about influencing and not about doing. So when she says, hey, we've got to go and do this, and then our CHRO says in 2019 we have 3 priorities. One of them is our HR transformation. We're about the third of the way through a global transformation. So go and execute on that. Make sure that people get paid, do all of the stuff in HR that we need to do in order to run the business, and deal with the Gender Balance Acceleration Plan. So that is what we're supposed to be working on. So in terms of all of us needing to be contributing to Gender Balance Acceleration Plan, because that's how we get paid bonuses, because they're the objectives that we're set. Like it wasn't a particularly difficult thing for us to recruit people into doing this stuff. I think as well, like the culture of Nestle is, despite its size, actually pretty, we're kind of the big family. I know that sounds cheesy, but we do work with genuinely socially minded, lovely, good people. So when the opportunity to work on something in HR that is genuinely impacting the lives of people that we work with, it wasn't a difficult project to sell. But yeah, so Sonia owns it. She asks for the help, and then we use all of our deeply ingrained governance processes to make sure that we have a project team, that we have the regular check-ins, that the markets understand that it's sponsored from on high, and so getting them to have the resources in place to be able to engage in the projects. Again, it's that real top-down is a big help.
That's fantastic. Who here is tightly connected with their D&I leader? All right, that's fantastic. I don't think that was true. I'm glad at this event we're talking more and more about being an enabler or / facilitator as opposed to the owner, of this analytics. And again, going behind the curtain with the big aha. So certainly celebrate what you've done, Jordan. And yeah, I look forward to learning more how it proceeds. So Jordan, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.